The desert wind held its breath. Then, boom! A thunderous crack tore through the air, the sound of a 50 cal rifle echoing across the canyon walls like distant thunder. The spotter flinched. Slowly, almost reverently, he pulled off his headset, eyes fixed on the distant steel plate. No one moved. No one spoke. He exhaled, voice tight with disbelief. Who the hell gave her that rifle? She remained still, calm, focused. The rifle in her hands was no longer a borrowed weapon. It was part of her. Beside her, a clipboard fluttered lightly in the wind, untouched, forgotten. She didn't smile, didn't speak. She didn't have to. Everyone already knew. She wasn't just good, she was something else entirely. She was Ghost Links. She wasn't on the roster, not officially. Her name didn't appear on the logbooks, and no one bothered to ask who she was. To the men on the range that day, she was just another clipboard. An observer, as the badge said. Logistics support. Civilian attachment, whatever. She wore no sidearm, no unit patch, no rank. Her olive green shirt was plain and pressed, but not military issue. Her boots were dusty but not scuffed like theirs, and her hair, tied back into a clean, no-nonsense ponytail, was probably the only thing anyone noticed before dismissing her entirely. The training range stretched across the desert valley like a battlefield simulation without the war, heat waves rippling off the rocky ridges, targets glinting in the sun, and thick, tense air filled with bravado and gunpowder. It was a boys' club that morning. Got yourself turned around, sweetheart? One of the spotters grinned as she stepped past the benches, clipboard in hand. Kitchen's that way. Must be lost, the HR tent's back at base. Chuckles rolled across the group like low thunder. Not cruel, just condescending, as if mocking her presence was just part of the daily rhythm. They weren't all jerks. Some of them were seasoned shooters with real tours under their belts. But even the quiet ones didn't step in. Because on that range, status came from your shot, not your silence. And she hadn't earned anything yet. She said nothing. She stood just off the firing line, out of the way, notebook closed against her side. A few glances passed her way when she took a knee near one of the shooting mats. No camera, no phone, just watching. That made some of them nervous. Hey, careful there, boys, one sniper muttered, elbowing his buddy. She's probably some Pentagon analyst writing down your missed shots. More laughter. Then it happened. A veteran, Sergeant Callan, known for his big mouth and even bigger bets, decided to break the tension the way only arrogance could. He hoisted a Barrett M107 off its bipod, the kind of 150 caliber sniper rifle that kicked hard enough to rattle your spine, and swaggered over toward her. Tell you what, he said theatrically. You want a souvenir? Here, take the big toy for your Instagram. Everyone laughed. He placed the massive rifle gently into her hands like he was offering a wedding bouquet. Just don't pull the trigger, someone called out. That thing'll knock you back to Supply Depot. She didn't respond, didn't flinch. She just looked at the weapon, balanced it in her grip, as if reacquainting herself. And then slowly, deliberately, she set it down flat on the mat in front of her. She knelt, adjusted the bipod. A few smirks faded. Does she even know how to shoulder that thing? Someone asked. Bro, she probably thinks the safety's the trigger. No one expected what came next, not even Callan, because in that moment something changed. Not loud, not dramatic, but noticeable. She moved like she'd done this 1,000 times, hands steady, eyes reading the terrain, and she still hadn't said a word. The laughter didn't stop all at once. It frayed, like someone slowly turning the volume down on a room that had gotten too loud. She had placed the rifle on the mat with a care none of them expected, not cautious like someone unfamiliar, but precise, like someone reacquainted with an old friend. Still no words. No asking for help, no double-checking the safety, no fumbling with the scope like they expected. Instead, she crouched beside the weapon and adjusted the bipod legs with quiet efficiency, leveling the barrel as if she already knew exactly what elevation she wanted, not a glance at anyone, not even a smirk. Her eyes were elsewhere, past the range, across the desert, into the wind. Sergeant Callan, arms crossed, tried to cover his uncertainty with a grin. All right, show's over. He motioned half-heartedly toward the others. She's just messing around. Probably read about this in a training manual. She still didn't respond. Instead, she did something subtle. So subtle, most of them wouldn't have noticed if one of the younger snipers hadn't pointed out. She moved, 10 feet, to her left, deliberately, slowly, counting the steps. No explanation, no hesitation. She lay prone again in the new spot, adjusted her body's angle to the earth, aligned the scope, and settled. One of the spotters, Staff Sergeant Hill, squinted in confusion. Wait, why'd she move? The wind wasn't stronger over there. The position didn't seem better. The line of sight was basically the same, or so they thought. Hill lifted his scope and scanned her new angle. Then his brows furrowed. That's the true wind line. His voice wasn't loud, but the words carried. A few of the guys glanced up, half smiling, but no longer laughing. You sure? I've only seen one shooter adjust for that without instrumentation. That's not guesswork. The wind shifted again, this time pushing hard off the distant canyon wall and carving chaotic eddies through the air above the valley. She didn't flinch. She tracked it with her eyes, tilting her head slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to read the terrain like someone listening to a language only she spoke. Her fingers gently turned the scope's elevation dial, then the windage. No one had told her the distance. No one had called the target. She didn't ask. Another murmur rolled down the firing line. Is she calculating that blind? She's not guessing, someone whispered. She's listening. Now even Callan said nothing. A different kind of silence took over. Not awkwardness, not respect, uncertainty. Because now they weren't sure what they were watching. Some stood straighter. A few stepped forward. The banter died completely. She lifted one hand briefly, palm outward, then slowly lowered it toward the rifle's grip. Her breathing was steady, her jaw set. One last adjustment to the buttstock. And then she waited. Longer than they expected. Not a staged pose. Not hesitation. She was waiting for something. Something they couldn't hear, couldn't see. The wind played tricks on that range. Even experienced shooters complained about how difficult it was to hit long shots when the terrain created spiraling air currents between the ridges. But she wasn't fighting the wind. She was moving with it. The spotter adjusted his rangefinder. 1580, he said under his breath, almost forgetting she hadn't asked. She didn't react. Dust twirled in the air in front of her muzzle, but she stayed absolutely still. One of the instructors leaned in close to another and muttered, "This isn't a guess. This is rhythm. She's tracking airflow cycles." Someone else added without taking their eyes off her, "I've seen that kind of stillness before. Not in training, in country, real ops." A hawk circled high above, coasting on the same invisible patterns. She inhaled, then, still not speaking, closed one eye, adjusted her finger on the trigger, and waited. No one knew what she was waiting for, but they all felt it coming. She waited, completely still, her cheek pressed gently against the stock, her eye focused through the scope. Not blinking, not wavering. The wind played across the desert like a restless ghost, tugging at stray grains of sand, fluttering a loose page on someone's clipboard behind her. But she didn't move. She was listening, not to the range, not to the spotter, but to something else. Something no machine could measure. Something no chart could map. Then the wind dropped. It was just a breath, a 2-second lull in the storm. Most shooters wouldn't have noticed it. She did. Her finger squeezed the trigger. Boom! The sound tore through the range like thunder ripped straight from the sky. The May .50 caliber round blasted from the barrel, flames licking the muzzle, shockwave cracking through the canyon. And then, silence. Not stunned silence. Not respectful silence. Something deeper. The kind of silence that happens when everything stops. The recoil should have shoved her back like a sledgehammer. It didn't. She absorbed it like she'd been born to do it. Shoulder locked, stance perfect. No one breathed. Eyes tracked downrange. Waiting, hoping, doubting. 1 second passed. 2. Then it came. Ping! A metallic ring echoed faintly in the distance. Sharp, clean, final. The steel plate, A thick slab of armored alloy designed to withstand brutal punishment shook gently under the impact. Center mass. Dead center. The shot hadn't just hit, it had defined the target, and just like that, everything changed. Mouths fell open. A few took involuntary steps forward, squinting in disbelief. One man lowered his binoculars, then raised them again, just to be sure. The spotter, the same one who had earlier offered her wind data, checked his digital tablet, refreshed the environmental readings, then looked back through his own optics. He blinked, looked again. No wind drift, no overcompensation, no hesitation. He whispered more to himself than anyone else. That's not luck. Slowly he took off his headset. His hands trembled slightly as he held it against his chest. He turned to face the others. That was, reflexive terrain reading, echo tracking. She timed it off canyon acoustics. Someone scoffed half-heartedly. Come on, that's not even in the manual. But even as he said it, his voice cracked with uncertainty. The steel target in the distance glinted faintly in the sun, now marked by a single perfect entry hole. No second shot, no adjustment, no correction. Just one, and done. She sat up slowly, still calm, still silent. She didn't celebrate, didn't smirk. She simply reached forward, clicked the safety on, and gently laid the rifle back down on the mat. The range, once full of swagger and booming voices, had gone hollow, still, respectful. Someone in the back finally broke the silence. Who the hell is she? No one answered. Even Callan, the one who had handed her the weapon like it was a joke, was now staring at the ground. He looked like a man trying to convince himself what he'd just seen hadn't really happened. But it had. She stood, picked up her clipboard, dusted off her pants with one motion, and began walking. Not quickly, not dramatically, just forward. As she passed the table where all the bet money had once been flying between shooters, no one touched it. The bills sat there, forgotten, their meaning lost. A senior instructor murmured, "That wasn't a shot, that was a statement." Another sniper, still kneeling, shook his head. "I've seen some of the best take that shot and miss. She just made it look like art." The younger spotter, still stunned, finally whispered a name, as if pulling it from a distant memory. Ghost Links. A few eyes widened. That name had floated through elite circles for years, never confirmed, never public. Just a story passed between instructors and special operations veterans, but now standing in dusty boots with no insignia and a forgotten clipboard, she was real. The silence that followed wasn't from disbelief anymore. It was from reverence. The shot still echoed, if not through the canyon, then through the minds of every man on that firing line. Nobody moved, not really. Some tried to make sense of what they saw. Others just watched her walk. Clipboard tucked under one arm, boots crunching softly against sun-baked gravel, the heat shimmering behind her like smoke from a myth. That wasn't someone lucky. That wasn't someone trained. That was someone known. They just didn't know her name yet. But someone finally tried to find it. A junior officer at the back of the group, unsettled by how fast the atmosphere had shifted, slipped away and accessed the range terminal inside the instructor's tent. He typed in her observer code from the logistics roster. At first, nothing unusual came up, just the standard data. Civilian liaison, logistics division clearance level, administrative status, active, non-combatant. He scrolled and stopped. There, embedded in the corner of the file, was a locked section. Redacted. Black bars covered most of the lines, and the access code flashed yellow. Restricted. Tier 1 only. He glanced around. No one else was in the tent. He looked back at the screen and hesitated. Then, with one deep breath, he entered the instructor override. The system resisted for a second, then beeped. One word appeared at the top of the page. Call sign Ghost Links. He blinked. He'd heard that name before. A story. A legend. A phantom sniper used by Joint Special Operations Command years ago. Unconfirmed, unlisted, undeniably effective. As the page loaded further, what little wasn't redacted turned his blood cold. Former Tier 1 contractor operational theaters. Classified confirmed eliminations. 27 longest recorded shot, 2,031 meters, under active hostile fire. Last known deployment, 4 years ago. Status changed to inactive in bed. She hadn't retired. She hadn't washed out. She'd simply vanished. Folded back into the shadows. Her current designation, logistics liaison, was a cover, a shell, a way to move inside installations without questions. She wasn't a guest at the range. She'd been there the whole time. The screen flashed again with one final notation. Mentor assigned. Wyatt. Retired. Deceased. The officer leaned back in the chair, staring at the name. Wyatt wasn't a ghost. He was a legend. One of the few snipers whose kill log had been studied like scripture. Word had it he trained only a handful of students. Some said only one. And now, standing out there with a rifle in her hands, making the impossible look routine, that lone student had revealed herself. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. When he returned to the range, his face told the story. A few instructors approached him, concerned. One asked if she was flagged for impersonation or unauthorized access. He shook his head. "She's not unauthorized," he said quietly. "She's just off the books." From that moment, no one called her observer. No one joked about her clipboard. They didn't even say her name. They didn't have to. They just looked at each other, veterans, instructors, elite shooters, and passed along a single phrase in hushed tones. Ghost Lynx is real. And she was right there in front of them. The next morning, no one had to check the schedule. They were already there, early, waiting. The sun had barely crested over the ridge when boots hit gravel, but the usual bravado and noise were gone. No betting, no cocky banter, no jokes about who could outshoot whom, because no one dared pretend anymore. She walked onto the range just after sunrise. No clipboard, no observer badge. Just her and a case, not standard issue. Worn leather, scratched from travel, patched with faded fabric that looked like it had been sewn by hand somewhere halfway across the world. She placed it gently on the shooting mat. No one asked her to. No one stopped her. This time, the instructors didn't circle her like she was intruding. They stood back, watching, waiting. The same men who laughed yesterday now whispered to each other like students unsure of the material. She opened the case and lifted out a rifle none of them recognized. It wasn't shiny or new. It wasn't military regulated. It was personal. A matte black, custom-built long-range bolt-action rifle, its carbon stock faded from years of wear, the cheek rest molded smooth by repeated pressure, the barrel sleeved with a suppressor worn like an old blade, and the scope hand-calibrated, markings etched by hand. She set up her position with the ease of routine, not rushed, not dramatic, just efficient. She lay prone, tightened her sling, and adjusted the bipod legs by feel alone. No one offered assistance. They wouldn't have dared. One of the instructors approached cautiously. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said softly, we apologize for yesterday." She raised one hand slightly, palm out, and stopped him before he could continue. "No apology needed," she said without turning her head. "You didn't know." There was no anger in her voice, just clarity, and that somehow cut deeper than shouting ever could. She took a long, silent breath. The wind shifted, lightly, steady from the southwest. 3 steel targets stood across the valley. One at Valor 200 yards. One at 180. One at just under 2,000 worn, hidden halfway behind a rocky outcrop. Most shooters wouldn't even attempt that last one. She didn't ask for a spotter, didn't wait for a range officer to approve. She just began. First shot, boom, sharp, deliberate, ping, center mass. She cycled the bolt, no wasted motion. Second shot, boom, ping, just below the bullseye. Close enough to rattle confidence. She adjusted slightly. The third target was nearly obscured. Angle was brutal. Wind was trickier now. Third shot, a breath longer, then boom. Silence. 2 full seconds passed. Ping. Clean impact. A fraction left of center. From first shot to last, 18 seconds. No one timed it officially. They didn't have to. It was felt. One of the instructors lowered his binoculars and said what everyone else was already thinking. That's not training. That's art. She stood, reloaded slowly, then locked the bolt open and stepped back. She didn't explain her shots, didn't analyze the result. She didn't need to. The range, once a proving ground for egos, had changed in less than 24 hours. Not by force, not by rank, but by presence. A different kind of leader had arrived, not one who demanded attention, but one who commanded silence. And from that silence, a new tone began to form across the range, one of respect, curiosity, and quiet discipline. She didn't just take the shot, she'd taken the lead. They didn't expect her to stay. After that second morning, most assumed she'd vanish again, like a myth fading back into the dust. But she didn't. She returned to the range the next day, and the next. And then something extraordinary happened. She posted a list. It wasn't on a bulletin board. It wasn't sent through official channels. It was a piece of paper quietly taped to the back of the supply shed with one heading in block letters. 12. No explanation, no signatures. Just 12 names. No ranks, no titles. The instructors were confused. The commanding officer raised an eyebrow. "Who authorized this?" he asked. No one responded, but every name on that list showed up the next morning before dawn, standing in silence, waiting. She walked past them without a word, paused, looked each of them in the eyes, then spoke for the first time at length. "I don't teach skills. You can learn those anywhere. I teach awareness." From that moment, the range transformed. Gone were the loud drills, the aggressive competitions, the prideful debates over velocity and optics. Instead, they spent 3 full days without even touching a rifle. She walked them through the canyon on foot, pointing out how wind sounded different when it bounced between rock formations. She had them sit, eyes closed, and breathe. Not once, not for minutes, but for hours. "Precision," she told them, "begins before the shot. It begins when you stop fighting the terrain and start listening to it." Some struggled. A few questioned it, at first, until she asked one of them to describe the wind pattern from the canyon's west wall using only what they heard. The shooter couldn't. She nodded, then demonstrated herself, head tilted, breath measured, eyes never even opened, describing the turbulence shift, the crosswind bounce, and the thermal rise off the stone. Every word matched the data exactly. No machine had taught her that. She taught students to count heartbeats between gusts, to watch how shadows shifted across gravel, to use the movement of grass blades as visual timers. This wasn't training. This was philosophy. One of the younger snipers, brimming with technical knowledge but lacking restraint, asked why she didn't focus more on rifle drills. She answered plainly, "Because the target doesn't care what rifle you use. It only knows if you were ready." Over time, the 12 began to change. They stopped measuring each other by who hit bullseye first. They started asking why they missed, what they ignored. Breathing became deliberate. Posture became intentional. Ego became irrelevant. Word spread. Even senior instructors began standing at the edge of her classes, pretending to check gear while listening to every word she said. The change was subtle but permanent. The range, once driven by rank, reputation, and rivalry, now moved to a different rhythm, a quieter one, a deeper one, and at the center of it all, always calm, always listening, was the ghost, not preaching, not commanding, teaching. She never asked for attention, and yet it followed her. Within 2 weeks, a Pentagon official arrived on base. Not in full dress, he wore field boots and a casual jacket, trying to blend in. He didn't come for inspection. He came for her. They sat on folding chairs behind the range tower, the sun already fading into a soft amber glow across the desert floor. He carried a sealed folder. She didn't look at it. "We've got positions open," he said. "Black clearance, full autonomy, flexible contracts." She didn't answer at first, just stared at the horizon, her fingers tracing the edge of a weathered notebook resting on her lap. "We've read your file," he continued. "You could write your own terms, operations, training, even lead." She finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm already leading." That was the end of the conversation. He left the next morning, contract unsigned. The rumor spread fast. Offers refused, orders declined, Silence kept. She wasn't interested in medals or missions. She didn't want her name on plaques or her record framed in glass. She wanted something harder to define: continuity. Each month she still returned to the range during qualifications. Not to compete, not to prove anything, just to shoot. One bullet at a time. One perfect shot, every single time. Marksmen rotated in from other bases hoping to challenge her. She never said no, but she never said yes either. She'd simply nod and gesture toward the mat. They'd fire, then she'd fire. They'd walk away changed. Because it wasn't just that she outscored them, it was that she did so without effort, without tension, without ego. Like the rifle was breathing through her, like the earth itself was guiding her hand. And still, she wrote. After each shot, she opened her leather-bound logbook, the same one that never left her side. No one had ever seen inside. They knew what it was: a record of everything, not just distances and groupings, but wind cycles, terrain reflections, time of day correlations, how bird flight patterns might signal updrafts, how the silence between gusts could measure pressure shifts more precisely than digital gauges. It wasn't a journal. It was an atlas of instinct. And one day she quietly said to an instructor beside her, "This isn't mine forever. I'm just holding it until I find the one." The one. No name, no description, just the idea that someone, somewhere, would come along, not better perhaps, but ready, ready to listen, ready to see. Her legend was never about the kill count, not the 27 confirmed, not the black ops, not the record shot. Her legacy wasn't in what she hit. It was in how she taught others to see the shot before it was even taken. That's what stayed long after she left the range for the day, and she always left the same way, quietly, without fanfare, with her rifle slung over one shoulder, the logbook tucked against her chest like a living map waiting to be passed down. To the students she left behind, she wasn't a ghost anymore. She was the guide, the one who turned precision into a language. And every time the wind moved across the sand, every time a young marksman paused to listen before pulling the trigger, her legacy whispered back. The new recruit had that familiar fire in his eyes, fresh from advanced training, top percentile in his class, eager to make his mark. His boots were still clean, his gear freshly issued, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who hadn't yet tasted humility. He looked around the range, eyes scanning the distant steel targets and sun-bleached benches. Then, with a half smirk, he asked the group clustered near the shade, "So, who's the top shooter here?" No one answered right away. A few glanced toward the far end of the range, past the gravel pits, beyond the wind flags that barely moved. There, lying prone on a mat the color of desert clay, was a woman in faded gear, ponytail tucked behind her shoulder, cheek resting against the worn stock of a custom rifle. No insignia, no announcement, just stillness. Stillness so complete, it didn't need to prove anything. One of the instructors finally spoke, not loudly, not for drama, just a quiet truth. "Steel doesn't lie." The recruit followed their gaze. She hadn't fired yet, but even from here you could feel it. Her finger hovered just over the trigger, not tense, not rushed, just waiting, calculating, listening, not to orders, not to attention, but to the wind, the terrain, the truth of the shot. And before the recruit could say another word, the range fell silent again. Not out of awe, not out of fear, out of respect. Because out here, the titles didn't matter. The past didn't matter. The ranks, the patches, the rumors, none of it mattered. Only the steel, only the silence, only the shot. And she was already listening for it. In today's fast-moving world, where titles and appearances often speak louder than actions, this story reminds us of a timeless truth. Real strength doesn't demand attention. It earns respect, quietly. She wasn't there to prove anything. She didn't ask for validation. She simply did what needed to be done, with focus, humility, and discipline. And in doing so, she changed an entire culture around her. It's a lesson many of us, especially those who've walked through life's harder roads, already understand. You don't need to raise your voice if your work speaks for itself. Whether you're a veteran, a teacher, a nurse, or a grandfather fixing things in the garage, there's honor in doing your craft well, even when no one is watching. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever met someone who reminded you of her? Someone quiet, overlooked, yet extraordinary? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might inspire someone else. And what do you think happened next? Did she pass on her logbook? Will someone rise to match her stillness? Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who values quiet leadership, and subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that honor the silent professionals among us. Because sometimes, the legends don't wear medals. They carry notebooks, and they listen more than they speak.